tell a gullah story. One time, a man named Ezra Praylo lived on John's Island, a little ways off the coast of Charleston, South Carolina. He was so set in his ways that no man or woman could convince him about anything. Something was done before his two eyes, yet he only said, "That ain't so." His opinion was the only one he put stock in. He didn't believe true was true. So I didn't find it hard to believe when folks told me that when he died, he refused to accept he was dead. He refused to realize when a man's dead, he's dead. Every night, he gets up from the burying ground and comes home. Tap, 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 comes a knocking at the door. And he says, "I'm so cold. I want to warm my feet." Every night, he gets up from the burying ground and comes home. Tap, 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 comes a knock at the door. And he says, "I'm so cold. I'm going to sit by the fire and toast my feet." It isn't natural for men who are dead to come back home from the burying ground. But the Gullah say that there are some people who just don't realize they're dead. They just remain near their old houses. The Gullah call them remainders, like Ezra Praylo. So every night, somebody's got to take him back to the burying ground, that old remainder, and explain to him that he, being dead, he ought to stay dead, and persuade him to stay where he is put once and for all until Judgment Day. Yet he keeps getting up, and so the people in the village are getting scared of this wandering and lively remainder. So the family decides to go to the preacher and explain to this here dead Ezra Praylo about being dead. And yet maybe the preacher could persuade him to stay in the burying ground. So the preacher said, "No, I done buried him once. I ain't gonna bury no man 2 times. But the preacher said he would speak a blessing over the grave. So the preacher spoke a blessing over the grave. And that night, the family sat around the fire, praying the dead man was gone for good, when tap, tap, tap comes a knocking at the door. And it was that same dead Ezra Praylo. And he says, Now, there ain't no sense in the world me staying over yonder in the moldy graveyard." That preacher's blessing hadn't done one bit of use. So the family decides to go to the herb doctor. And they say to her, "Now, what are we going to do?" And the herb doctor says, "Oh, you line that grave with green skullcap leaves. Not the old dry ones, the fresh green ones. Then he'll rest easy." So they did that. And that night, they were all sitting around the fire when tap, tap, tap comes a knocking at the door. And it was that same dead Ezra Praylo. They're all mighty upset, and the women start wailing. And Ezra says, "Stop your foolish hollering, and give me my old overalls. I ain't gonna stay in no damp, wet grave with all that green litter unless I've got on my overalls." So they give him his overalls, and he puts them on, right on over his best black suit. And he turns around and goes back to the burying ground all by himself. And he rests from his rambles from that time on. Thank you.